Really nice, informative.
I've got so many seats to pick from.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Really nice, kind of informative, colorful, kind of storification of the continuum of everything that we are living within from a technological perspective, where we've come, where we are, where we're going, but also the health side of things and the longevity side of things. So Tom, thanks so much for that really knowledgeable, well-delivered, thoughtful keynote presentation, which I found very informative. First and foremost, you've just landed yesterday. How's your brain fog, and how many lattes are currently on?
Well, when I got up this morning, they almost ran out of soy milk and lattes at the hotel, but I'm good. And just to trade, so first of all, good to see you again. So
yes.
I saw John 2 weeks ago. He was doing a talk at an innovation conference in Washington, D.C., and so it was nice to return the favor and come to Dublin to see you.
Yeah, well, hopefully your jet lag will be as good as mine was in DC. I think I managed to handle it pretty well, although coming west is always much more challenging. In terms of where do you see AI impacting the world in a way that is meaningful in the next year, 5 years, and 10 years?
Wow, that's a very broad question, John. Well, I think right now, we're doing a lot of real-time things. Again, I'd just say if we go back to fall of 2022, there's been this AI hysteria where, all of a sudden we had large language models and generative AI. And, I think it frankly freaked a lot of people out. And I've had the opportunity to be both an advisor and a speaker around the world. In the last 7 weeks, I've been multiple places in the United States. I was in Istanbul with a group of physicians from around the world. So I should say, I have the opportunity to take the pulse of a lot of people on the front lines. And, there's been a lot of concern about AI, a lot of worry. And I guess my assessment is, at times, I think it's less about AI itself and more about clinical and health leaders more concerned about what I call the velocity of change. So economists talk about something called linear growth. And linear growth is essentially a steady state, predictable way in which innovation happens in the world. So typically something new comes out, say a technology, it produces some incremental value. And there's a small gap between when it's introduced and when you start seeing adoption. And then as the adoption really starts kicking in, you typically see another gap between that happening and regulators and policymakers having to run to catch up. There's another thing economists talk about, which is disruptive or exponential growth. And this is where something like a technology starts looking like it's linear, so it's following this trajectory, and all of a sudden you have the hockey stick. And it defies all logic of the scale to which change happens. And this is where even great leaders, they're all geared towards linear growth. They don't know what to do when we see this kind of rapid change. And economists tell us exponential growth can't last. It eventually levels out. But I think we've been in this exponential growth curve. And so some of us, just all of us trying to keep up. And then some of it, to me, is the recognition that we are all early in the journey. And so, anytime I'm hearing, and it is amazing to me how many people are out on the lecture circuit or the talk circuit as AI experts, and they've never actually worked with AI. But, the key is looking at anyone who claims to be having it figured out. I mean, I'm 15 years in. I'm still a student, but it's important to recognize we're all in this journey. It's all early, and we'll figure it out together. But, a lot of what I talked about on what's happening right now with the ability to have AI augmenting the work of people like you when it comes to imaging. And it's often fun to look at, those who are writing and talking about, well, AI is going to replace physicians or nurses. And there seems to be something about radiologists. I mean,
like on a hit list.
Well, I mean, it's almost like, I mean, to me,
Yeah, Tom, where am I going, Tom?
well,
Am I going to be out of work?
There is hope for you, John. No, I think radiologists, as specialists go, are kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield of specialties. I mean, you don't get the respect you deserve. But anytime I hear, and there's still articles being written on, should we be training as many radiologists? And anytime I see that, I think two things. One, they don't understand what AI is good at and what humans are uniquely qualified to do. And the second thing, I think, is they have no idea what radiologists actually do. They think you just sit in a dark room, drink coffee, and read images all day, which I think you do more.
Yeah, no, we have an incredibly diverse integration with the complex healthcare system, and we deal with the body from head to toe. We deal with all clinicians, we deal with all technologies, and we have this huge first mover advantage. 80% of FDA approved medical devices are in the radiology sphere, and that's based on the fact that we look at images and it's pattern recognition, so it's easy for AI to help us. And actually, as you know, radiologists will be replaced by radiologists who have AI rather than just AI. But you touched on talking to leaders, and you'll meet Professor Martin Curley, who's a good friend and colleague of mine. He's also going to be at the Royal College of Physicians tomorrow, but he talks about open innovation 2.0, which is so important for whatever you're trying to innovate. And at its core, 80% of success for technology is leadership. And we talked about this briefly in Chicago or in DC last week, but the 80% is high trust relationships, like what we've got, intense networking, like what we're doing here today, but also having a shared vision and outcome, whether that's at a charitable level, at a UN or global level. But when you get all those three parts right, then the technology, which is out there and it's only getting better, then you can actually unlock the value, whether it's to make things better, cheaper, or faster for all the stakeholders, the patient, the providers, the hospitals, the insurers. So how do you make people better leaders? Because we can clearly see the impact of one person, and it's invariably men, who change the nation or change the world because of their vision or dystopian perspective. How do you actually connect with leaders to actually make them really empower them to do something incredible?
Well,
and be responsible.
Yeah, I mean, again, so much of what I've done in my career is working with clinical and business leaders. So it's a great question. I guess I'd start with, because I'm a data guy, a lot of data, including groups like Gartner, who have studied this, basically say in the world of digital and AI, leaders must have new hard and soft skills. So you can be a health and medical leader up to this point, highly successful, but if you look at the dynamics of change and where we're going with AI and digital, groups like Gartner say there are hard and soft skills to have that if leaders possess, they're going to be able to lead us, and if they don't, they're probably not going to be very successful. So things like hard skills, where Gartner says, leaders really need to know AI, and which is not to say they need to know how to code, but they need to know how to do things like what I've talked about, to say, here are the capabilities AI can provide. Here's the opportunity to change things like clinical and operational workflow process. Then there are soft skills, and it's things like design thinking. So I know in America, maybe in other parts of the world, if you want to get people complaining about something, ask a physician about how they feel about their electronic medical record and how that impacts their workflow. And typically people love to complain about that. But if you look at EMRs that do a lot of good, EMRs originally were created to help streamline things like coding and billing. And then someone along the way said, hey, let's foist this onto the physicians and others. But if we had started by having a group of doctors and nurses with design thinking principles design it, my guess is would be complaining about something else. So hard and soft skills. And then I still bring it back to the willingness to think differently and change. And history is replete of healthcare being change resistant. And I wrote an article recently about titled "Celebrating the Medical Misfits," where if you go back, to the 1800s and the cholera epidemic raging in London, there was a young upstart physician by the name of John Snow, where the medical leaders at the time thought that cholera was caused by bad air. And John Snow came along with data saying, no, it's not bad air, it's polluted water. And he had all the data. And when he first presented it to the leaders of medicine at the time in London, what did they do? They laughed at him. And eventually he got to the point where they accepted it. Or I look at the 1970s and 80s, where arthroscopic keyhole surgery was very well proven to be effective, and yet it took surgeons almost a decade to accept it because the belief at the time was, well, large problems require large incisions. So, our ability to have leaders that are willing to be open to thinking differently, supporting others underneath them to think differently, which really, when you think about it, that comes down to things like, what's the culture you're creating? I mean, I've worked in healthcare a long time, systems around the world, and I don't think I mean disrespect, but I've never met a healthcare leader that says anything other than we're innovative. And just as a math guy, it's like, even on a bell-shaped curve, how can everyone be the same? So I think leadership requires thinking differently. Leadership requires what groups like Gardner and others who have studied this say are a different skill set. And when you have that, I think those are the organizations that I would want to be part of. Those are the organizations, if you are trying to pilot and incubate something that's new, those are the organizations that I'd be knocking on the door of.
What are the players in terms of, there's various parts of the ecosystem in terms of what's driving change. There's the technology, and we can see, 3.5, 4, 4.0, 5. Is that exciting you? Or is it the things that Sally Ann is seeing in all these startups and the actual application of technologies? Or do you see a shift in governmental appreciation of the use cases and things being more democratized and globalized? What is kind of giving you great hope that this is incredible? Because you can have stuff that is explosive and pivotal from a technological perspective, but actually it kind of ends up just blocking up the motorway and everything is just jammed, but actually nothing is actually moving.
Wow, there's a lot to parse, and there were at least 5 questions there. So innovation's typically going to come from people like those of you in the audience. It's the smaller groups typically. It's people who are singularly focused, including the people you had on stage previously. They have passion, they have fire in their belly, and they're ready to change. The larger the organization, oftentimes, to me, the more resistance, the more friction there is in that system that has to be overcome. And then I'd say at a macro level, I don't think there are any bad players. When you look at things like, and Sally Ann mentioned some things, but if I look at, for example, in most parts of the world, healthcare is a right. In America, no matter what you think, legally, healthcare is not a right. And that creates a whole lot of interesting dynamics when it comes to everything from the data sets being biased because they are underweighting vulnerable populations, but more importantly, in places like America, the economics work on a break-fix system. So Sally mentioned this company doing amazing work in Singapore with the use of AI and advanced nudge theory. Singapore, by the way, has the largest problem with diabetes in all of Asia. Their government, which is a payer and provider, literally declared war on diabetes. They're doing incredible things to not wait until someone has diabetes, but rather getting out ahead of it. And again, the American health system does many things great, but I would just point out America is one of the global leaders in preventable amputations. So preventable amputations, think about that for a second. And that's mainly due to our inconsistent treatment of diabetes. So I look at what governments like Singapore is doing, where the system they're using, where consumers can volunteer in real-time data, pushing out these highly individualized nudges. they're showing they're actually slowing the progression of pre-diabetic to diabetic. So whether that's a quality win, a consumer win, or I know once someone crosses over to full diabetes, it costs the Singapore government $8,000 a year addition for as long as those people are alive. So the opportunities, the ideas start with people like you, and we just have to get the rest of the systems aligned, including the economic incentives to do the right thing.
We talked actually about leadership, and I think there's a great example of leadership in the world, which is Estonia. Estonia was part of the USSR, and then that broke apart. And we talked about this in DC last week, whereby it had three major problems as a country. It was broke, it had corruption, and it was very, very bureaucratic. And it is now today, despite its population of being 1.3 million people, which is kind of interesting in itself, the most digitally connected country in the world. And everybody's got a number, and it's very much bedrocked in blockchain technology, privacy, security. Key thing in technology is trust. But 80% of the success of Estonia comes down to actually leadership. And you can just hit it lucky. Sometimes a CEO comes in, he's great, or she's great. But people are so important in that whole factor. What are the opportunities in the world? And I think actually, we talk about, living in the developed world and all the exciting things that we're seeing. What opportunity is there actually in, the more challenged countries, whereby there's actually a potential opportunity to leapfrog? And you take, for example, the most incredible medical device in the world is not the CT scanners that I use, but actually, your phone. And we've seen the potential use cases of it. So you take these countries whereby they're kind of barren in many ways from much innovation, but they've got huge potential to actually have a clean slate.
Right. Well, I guess the short answer is yes. The beauty of AI technology is not just the purview of developed nations and countries with money. If you're in a place that has a cell tower, if you're in a place that has core infrastructure, you have the ability to innovate. And this was a number of years ago, but I had the opportunity to be an advisor on a project in a part of Africa where they still have migratory populations. And they were looking, well, how do you serve migratory populations for healthcare? And I forget the percentage, but these were people that truly were still migrating as people, and yet a fairly large percentage of them had a cell phone. So it's like, and at the time, some of the smart capabilities were limited, but you start looking at, well, what are all the possibilities with the cell tower and some other things to at least start providing basic services? And this gets down to then, once again, how do you think differently? Which, to me, I mean, everyone loves to think they're innovative, but I wrote another article on this where there is an art and a science to being innovative, and there's a lot of science that points out how some people in their brains are just wired differently. They're constantly looking for that thing that's other than the way things work. And again, progress, digital and AI is not the purview of only developed nations.
So we're just going to land things this morning, Tom. I'm just going to ask you two things. First off, what do you see as giving you great hope? What's giving you a sense that things can actually change, will change? So that's the first thing I want to ask you.
Well, I think, again, I'm going to keep coming back to, I guess, honoring this room. You're here because somehow you believe in longevity. I'm guessing you believe that things can be different and better. The best ideas are not going to come from the government. They're not going to come from the big organizations. They're going to come from people like you in this room, the people that were in the rooms at the Innovation Conference in DC, the people that are going to be in my talk in Nashville next week. But it's like the impetus for change is right here. The challenge is often, it's like, how do we foment the revolution to say, at least in my country, I believe healthcare is a very noble cause. I believe it has huge issues that cannot and will not be solved by the same ways of thinking, the same ways of doing what we do. So how do we foment the revolution? How do we organize everyone who feels the same way? You have an idea, you have expertise. How do we empower you? And that's where I didn't have it in my slides today, but I did an interview and an article for something called MedPage Today a few months ago, and you know, the theme of what I was telling them is AI has a PR problem, because we always talk about AI as a technology, and to me, that's the wrong discussion. AI is not about technology. Done right, AI is about empowerment. It's about empowering people like you as providers. It's about empowering consumers and others to be better, all those things that we roll up to longevity, health span, lifespan, quality of life in this moment. It's not going to come from the big organizations, big government. It's going to come from people like us. And we, I mean, I'm spending a lot of time, I've got another whole talk track where I started with a slide and the word unrest in the definition. Is anyone in this room feeling a sense of unrest for how the health system works today? If yes, how do we channel that? How do we leverage that? And again, technology only adds value if it comes in behind people like you to know how to drive change. So to me, that's what I'm pushing on. I'm assuming that's what you're pushing on. And to me, that's how we're going to make the system better.
Great. And Tom, on a personal level, what inspires you? And you know, what inspires you, for example, to write your books like Hacking in Healthcare? And I think you mentioned you were thinking about writing another book.
I've got a manuscript due by Labor Day. Yes.
Oh.
I guess what I've always been in healthcare. I'm not a clinician. It's just, as I said, it's a very noble cause. It needs a lot of help, and it needs to be changed. And you know, if my books inspire anything, and most of my books it's not about. I mean, I don't really have brilliance. What I have is a lot of experience in working with really good people around the world. And I mean, that's all my learning has come from working with people who are pushing on problems and are trying to find new ways to solve them.
Well, folks, it's been a real privilege. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here in Dublin again.
Well, thank you
and
for your work,
sharing all your thoughts. It was really great. And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Lawry.